G'day guys, and welcome back to another episode here on the Torq Hub YouTube channel. In a previous episode we gave you a brief rundown on my Project VH Commodore. It's going with a Pro Street style theme, and then that would also make you familiar with this old lump. Now this thing here is 308 cubic inch all Australian Holden V8. And in order to try and keep up with all of my mates, like Rob with the Turbo Tonner, also Kurt's Turbo Project, and a few other cool things that we've got coming, this thing isn't going to cut the mustard. So in order to go into the 9-second territory like they are, I'm going to need one of these. Oh, what? Man, that shit worked for Kurt. Bullshit. So here we have it. This is what we're going to need to get the job done. And this is still an Australian Holden V8 block engine. As you can tell, there's probably a few different things on the outside. I'm actually going to run through this engine from top to bottom, including the inside, and show you what you would need to do to get your Aussie V8 to the 9-second potential range. This is going to be a naturally aspirated deal as well, which makes it especially hard than the guys that are using the power adders. So why don't you come along with me and we'll check out what makes this thing tick and what we can expect to get from it. So I guess we're just going to start off with a bit of a walk around and have a look at this thing, and what a beast it is. Compared to the other 308 we were just looking at, this thing is like a tower of power. I'm going to go through this engine from top to bottom, like I said before, and where we'll start with the induction package at the top, then we'll go down to the heads and the valve train, then we'll go down to the bottom end, and I'll try and explain it all to you as best I can with what little knowledge I have. But let's get this ball rolling. So at the very top here you can see that it has a Pro Systems carburetor. This is a Holly body, 4-barrel mechanical secondaries. It's been custom built by Pro Systems to my spec, and they say it will flow 980 CFM. It's an E85 carburetor. We may move to methanol later on if we do race this thing semi-regularly, but in the interests of wanting to run it on the street, we're going to start off with E85. You can also see up here we've got the TC Performance and Race Engines fuel log, billet fuel log, and their throttle linkage as well, which is a pretty nice piece, and it's all Australian gear. You can also see that I'm running a Torq Power Pro Port single plane intake. Single planes are definitely what you want for a high RPM sort of setup. You can see there are fuel injector holes drilled on this one. I did buy it second hand, so I will have to get those probably tapped, and we'll put a bolt in there and seal it up, or maybe weld it, I'm not sure yet, but we'll definitely have to sort that out before this thing runs. I should also note that this engine isn't ready to go yet. I've literally just mocked it together for the video so I can give you guys a bit of a rundown and show some people who may not have seen this kind of thing before. So that's pretty much it for the induction. Let's take that intake manifold off and we'll show you inside the heads and the valve train. Alright, and we're back. So you can see that I've just done the one side. Over here looks a little bit different to here. I've literally, as I said before, just mocked up a few of these engines just to show people who may not have been able to see this kind of thing before, and just to give you guys a brief rundown on what it is that I'm going to be working with. So starting over here at the top, you can see that we have Yellow Terra Platinum roller rockers. These are a beautiful piece. Australian made, 1.65 to 1 ratio, which is a little bit higher than the stock 1.5. We've also got a crane double valve spring. You can see there's no valve in there. Once again, I'm just trying to illustrate what goes into a combo like this without actually having one at final assembly. So you got your crane double valve spring there. It also has a dampener in there, which some people might confuse with a triple valve spring, but it's definitely not. It's also got your titanium retainers, got 10-degree locks, and stainless valves that go in there as well. Going further down the valley, we've got the Trend 80 wall chromoly push rods, and right down the bottom there we've got the crane tie bar roller, solid roller lifters. So solid roller means that this thing is going to need a lot of valve train maintenance. We'll be very regularly checking the valve clearance and the lash on the rockers, making sure that spring pressures are in good check, and probably replacing the lifters semi-regularly. This is the issue when you're running a solid roller cam setup. It's definitely not for a daily driver, but does give you great valve train stability with high lift and high RPM. We're running a Camtech custom ground cam on a crane billet core. So Camtech buy the core from Crane and then they grind their cam on there. I'm not going to give away all the specs, but it's going to be pretty angry. We're sitting up around the 270 degree duration range at 50 thou tappet lift. And the valve lift is sitting over 700 thousandths of an inch, which for those of you who know boats, that is getting after it, definitely. It's got 108 lobe separation angle, which means it's going to give it that really tight, choppy idle, which will be pretty cool to hear. I actually really can't wait to listen to it. It's going to be really cool. Some of the train spotters out there might also notice that there is a little bit of a hose here in the valley. The valley's also been nicely polished and deburred. That's to help with oil return. These things do have a bit of an issue with pumping oil to the top of the motor and then not being able to get it back down to the sump again. So what they've done is they've modified the oil system with this pipe here. It's called a single pipe oiling mod, and you can find it on forums like Aussie V8. They do a bit of a rundown on how you can do what they call a priority mains oiling system. And that's just basically going to make sure that number 4 main cap journal doesn't get starved of oil, which was kind of the Achilles heel of these blocks. This block originally came from a VL Group A, believe it or not, and we'll see that a little bit later when I turn the motor upside down. You'll see it's got a 4-bolt main. The heads are a Come Racing item. I can't remember if they were a 590 or a 600 series. Why were they disassembled? Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to keep them, to be honest. I've got to do a little bit more research, a little bit more work to see whether that is going to get to where I want my goal to be. Are they going to get there or not? Yeah, I need to speak to some more machinists. But once again, you can see there's been a lot of polishing and deburring down here in the oil return hole. Same as on this side, and you can also see there that there is a monster -16 port welded onto the back. Like I said before, these things are pretty shocking for getting oil back down to the sump. So what we're going to do on this particular setup is from there, we're going to run an external hose directly down into the sump. And there's one on the other side as well. So that is, for those of you who are going to be doing high RPM sort of stuff where the oil is just going to be slapping around, definitely look into that sort of setup. It's really good. Not super expensive to do. Yeah, just a quality thing to do. But anyway, that kind of gives you a bit of a rundown on the valve train setup. Like I said, solid roller. Got all the good gear in there. Really strong, but a lot of high maintenance. So from here, why don't we pull those heads off and we'll check out the bottom end. So before I get right down into the bottom end, I figured I should probably address what's going on at the front here. You can see that the engine doesn't have any mounts on the side of the block, but it does have that big engine plate. So that will mount to the chassis directly onto that plate. We've got a fair bit going on here at the front too. So you've got an electric water pump in there by CSR. We've got a Moroso vacuum pump, which you can see that hose there was plumbed into the driver's side rocker cover. What that's going to do is that's going to pull any crankcase pressure that we have within the engine. That's going to stop any pressure on the back side of the piston. It's also going to let the piston ring seal better and just let the engine run freer. So that's a really handy thing. A lot of people just adding that vacuum pump on the engine dyno, they have seen, you know, upwards of 30, 50 horsepower gains just by that one device being on the engine. Underneath that, we've got a Moroso oil pump. Now, the oil pump on a Holden V8 is usually over here. There's a blanking plate there. But this one here has an external single stage oil pump. So this is sort of derivative from what you would see on a dry sump setup. Over here is the suction on the sump, and that'll be a -20 suction to this port here. From there, we'll pump to a remote oil filter and then into the engine via that port there on the custom blanking plate. Pretty cool thing. Just make sure that we don't run out of oil pressure at RPM. Obviously, this one is crank driven off that mandrel there. So the higher the RPM, the more oil feed we got. So that's pretty important, especially for a race car. All right, so let's pull that front engine plate off and then we'll spin the motor around. We're starting to run low on things to look at now. It's getting pretty bare. So you can see down there we have 30 thousandths over CP pistons. They are a forged piston. Gives us about a 13.2 to 1 compression. Static compression, that is. And you can also see those beefy 1/2 inch ARP head studs. Pretty much a must, really. You want to really keep that that sealing on the head gasket. At the front here, you can see we've got the Romac balancer and a billet timing cover by Bullet Engineering in South Australia. See, it's got that little window there, so we can actually use that to adjust our cam timing fairly easily. Literally unbolt that little window and we can change the advance or retard of the cam by a couple of degrees, nice and simple. And we've also mentioned before on the front of the crank, we've got that mandrel there which drives both our vacuum pump and our oil pump. So down the bottom of the engine here, we have a high energy Pro Bracket series sump. It's got the extra wings and capacity for oil, and you can see that it's also been modified with those AN dash fittings for oil feed and return, like we were saying before. Like I said, we're pretty much running out of things to look at here, so we'll spin it over and I'll tell you the rotating assembly setup. So here we are at the bottom end. This is where the party starts. So As I said before, this is a Group A block, which you can see there has 4-bolt main caps. Most of these blocks only had a 2-bolt main. Now that is almost 100% needed to be changed if you're chasing any kind of power. The main caps do have a tendency to start moving or walking, and the crank suffers, as do the rods, and we just end up with a catastrophic failure. But you can see there on the casting, started out as a 5-litre block, and yeah, that's pretty much that. We've got in the rotating assembly a billet crankshaft from Crankshaft Rebuilders, formerly known as Crankshaft Rebuilders, now known as Ozcrank. We've got a Lunardi billet rod, 5.85 inch long, and we've got the CP pistons that we discussed earlier. This rotating assembly gives us a cubic inch of 383. So yeah, she's a pretty big stroker, and it's got plenty of torque, heaps of grunt, and this one's gonna love a good rev. So especially with the valvetrain package, like I said, I might be changing the heads yet, try and get a little bit more airflow, but yeah, this is more or less what you can expect to see down the bottom end of a lot of the serious Holden race cars. I do want to street drive this combination, as crazy as it sounds. It is a pretty highly strung sort of setup. But yeah, I am definitely keen to get out and put a couple of street kilometers on it, even if it does mean a little bit of extra maintenance. So yeah, that is more or less the wrap up. Well, there you go guys, wrapped it up there. You've seen the whole of my bullet here from top to bottom. So this is the donk that's going to be going into my VH eventually. As I said before, not sure if I'm going to be using these heads, and I might be doing a slight revision of the valve train, so it's not ready to go just yet, but it will be in the not too distant future, we hope. Probably in 2021 we'll be able to breathe this thing into life. How do we know what sort of performance it's going to have? Well, this thing has already run its course before with a different intake setup, running a different fuel, with very conservative sort of cam timing. It ran 660 horsepower on the engine dyno. Also ran in a VH at 9.80 at 136 mile an hour. So that's pretty stout sort of running. We're only going to get better from there, realistically. So my goal for this motor at 383 cubic inch is minimum 700 horsepower at the crank, and I would love to get that car down the quarter mile at about a 960 or a 950. From there, who knows, we might change the plan a little bit, but thanks so much for watching guys. I hope you really enjoyed this episode, getting a big rundown on this 383 cubic inch Iron Lion. If you'd like to see some more, make sure you hit the subscribe button down the bottom of the screen and give us a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. So thanks again for watching. Until the next one, we'll catch you around.